Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
Now then, so much to discuss. We have our quarterfinals in the Heineken Champions Cup on the field. Leinster against Saracens. We have Ulster for all their good play. The reward is a trip to Toulouse. We have Clermont hosting Racing, which should be a great game. And Exeter host Northampton as well. Those matches to be played on the weekend of April 4th. Connacht, as you might have seen, registered 2 bonus points. They came back brilliantly initially against Montpellier, but ultimately lost 35 points to 29, already out, of course. And Munster, when they kicked off against the Ospreys, were already out in a strange atmosphere at Thomond Park. 33 points to 6, they prevailed. We have with us Ruaidhri O'Connor from the Irish Independent. Very welcome.
Thanks, Joe.
And Matt Williams, it's been a while. Come in.
Hey, Joey. Hey, Rory. Good to see you guys.
Great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. So we'll get on to the rugby on the field in a while, but let's start with Saracens. They are the story of the weekend. Relegated officially from the Premiership, so the dynasty that was 5 Premierships and 3 European Cups is coming to an end, certainly at Premiership level. Whatever happens this season in Europe remains to be seen. £5.36 million fine, as we know, and then a 35-point deduction as well. They were found to have operated above the £7 million salary limit, and the decision was made to relegate them. The Exeter Chief Executive, Rory, Tony Rowe, was on BBC Radio very shortly after the decision was made, and he said they've taken relegation, he said, of Saracens, and he wanted to be very clear on this point. They have taken relegation. Let's be very honest about this before people have sympathy with Saracens. They had 2 choices. They could either open up their books so that Premiership Rugby could do a forensic audit of exactly what's gone on, or they could take relegation. So it was their choice not to open their books. Premiership Rugby, all the chairman, we just want to move on. It was their opportunity to open everything up to the salary cap people or take relegation. They've decided to take relegation. They have cheated, and I'm just upset it's taken so long. At the moment, they're still picking their team every week, largely from the squad they had last year, which is still in breach of the salary cap. They have been asked by all the rest of the Premiership clubs to reduce that squad back as well. So no sympathy from Tony Rowe or any of the chairmen who would have voted in this decision. Now, they're not disinterested parties, we should say.
No.
But Saracens did have the option to open up their books, which would have not been pretty.
Yeah. Would the salary cap people not have access to the books in the first place? Is that not the whole point of having a salary cap person, that they can win and just that it's all... There's a lack of transparency to this whole process. Even the fact that we haven't seen the initial report, Lord Dyson's report into it, that the fact that you have to go into a closed room and you can't bring it out and everything is second-hand, that, you know, I don't have any sympathy for Saracens. I think maybe they should have been relegated in the first place. You know, like, one of the first things after you kind of digested the initial news was to wonder how the hell are they under the salary cap this season, and how are they able to keep going, even though, you know, there's a couple of retirements at the end of last season, but they brought in England's starting fullback from the World Cup to, you know, from Wasps. They outbid Wasps for that player in Elliot Daly. So how are they ever going to be under this year? So what was the consequences of that? What were they going to be? And this is the consequence of that. And, you know, it's taken a long time. I think the first Daily Mail report was published in March. The results of the investigation was launched in May or June. The results were released just days after the World Cup final, and here we are in January, and they've been relegated for next season, which completely ruins the lower half of the the Premiership season, and kind of makes the whole thing a bit of a farce. So, it's all a little bit murky in terms of you would like them to open up the process a little bit more, so we know a lot more about exactly what Saracens have done. I think the Premiership needs to look at itself as well. It can't just be on Saracens. I mean, how did they get away with it for 3 years, having been previously found to be out of compliance with the salary cap and warned in 2015? All of these things, I think they can't just bury it now and just say Saracens are gone, we're all okay. I think there's a lot more that Premiership and rugby overall needs to do with regards to transparency. And it's just a remarkable story that's kind of led to a remarkable finish. And I suppose the weird thing is that Saracens are still alive and kicking in Europe and still going.
Very much so, and I would say suddenly very interested in Europe as well.
Yeah.
I must agree with you. I was surprised there's no stipulation in every team's participation in the Premiership that at any moment, independent person or otherwise, or maybe someone in the Premiership, has access to all the audit or to all the finances.
Yeah, I heard Mark Evans, the former Harlequins CEO, who's now working in Perth in that Global Force Rugby League or whatever it's called, is a very good voice on this because he's a former Premiership chairman, but he's no longer part of it and is able to speak his mind and clearly disagrees with the way they've gone. And he was talking about the AFL, which Matt will probably know more about than I do, but the AFL have a salary cap, and they have a salary cap department with it, which I think has 7 or 8 staff, and they basically have carte blanche to go into any organisation and investigate. I think the NRL has something similar as well. And I think in the NRL, again, Matt can correct me if I'm wrong, a team was basically stripped of titles recently for breaching salary caps. So I might have that mix up. But, you know, I think the Premiership, he has argued, and he makes very good points on it, he's worth actually having on. He says that the salary cap in isolation is not effective. They need to have a number of other steps. They need to close the league off. They need to have a collective bargaining agreement with players. It's designed to keep the whole league free, you know, kind of more fair, but because they're part of a tree that ends up in Europe, it's not a closed shop in the way that other leagues are. It's a much bigger picture, but there's definitely a number of issues that the Premiership need to look at now and address away from this, because it's not, for all that, if Saracens go away, there's always the potential that someone else can come and do this if I suppose the governance around it, I mean, we seem to be talking about governance as much as sport these days, if the governance around it isn't properly resourced and given some backbone, and if there's no transparency, because how can fans of any club really trust what's going on?
Matt, it was generally reported that Saracens, even if they were trying to in good faith, couldn't get their books in order because, frankly, other Premiership clubs were not of a mind to take their players. So it was actually quite difficult, it seems, for them to get their breach of the salary cap under control this season, bar taking pay cuts. And that's a very difficult thing to enforce when players have contracts. So there's that aspect to them trying to get their house in order. And then you have the fact that you have a bunch of other chairmen having a big say in this decision. So the upper half, the Exeters of the world who want to win the Premiership, are clearly going to say, yes, they should be relegated. And the bottom half, quite clearly, are going to absolutely jump at the chance to avoid relegation. So I'm in the uncomfortable position here of putting some kind of case forward for Saracens. But does that in any way beg the question, was relegation necessary on top of the 35-point deduction and the $5 million fine?
I would have stripped them of their title as well, which is what happened in Australia. The Melbourne Storm, one of the great sporting franchises, it's one of the great sporting stories in the last 20 years, were in breach of salary, and that's exactly what happened to them. They had to play, there's no relegation, that's in the NRL, the National Rugby League in Australia, there's no relegation there, but they had to play a season knowing that they got no points. They were going to end up on 0 points. They just had to play a year whether they won or lost, and they were stripped of their premiership the year before. Look, salary caps are there for a reason, and one of the main reasons is to spread the talent evenly out across the competition so one team doesn't dominate, like the English football, where you've got, Man City, Liverpool on top there, but, basically the biggest spender wins. And if you haven't got the money, you're then in the mid-table or the bottom of the table. And that's what a salary cap's there for. And if you can't afford to keep a player, that forces that player to go to another club. Now, there's a lot of negatives with that. So there's very little player loyalty to clubs and very little loyalty to players from clubs. They literally, contracts in the NRL aren't worth much. But without knowing all the facts and having sat in the meetings, as Rory has pointed out, so we don't know all the facts here, it seems to me that the Premiership has got an idea of a salary cap and hasn't done all the other work that's got to go into running a salary cap. As Rory, you've got to have an integrity unit. You've got to have a unit that can walk in and check the books. This, from my understanding, what's been spoken in the background is a bit like what happened to the Western Force, gee whiz, it might be 15 years ago, maybe a little bit more now, where they had extra agreements outside of their contracts that were organised by the club. And they're saying, well, that's not in the salary cap. Well, in all the other places, including the Premiership, it is. I suspect that they didn't open their books because they didn't want to embarrass players. And so it would get out what players were getting. And I think there may be I know there is a lot of loyalty within Saracens. I know they're a very tight unit because I've visited there and I know Mark McCall quite well. And I suspect that there's some form of protection gone on of people's names, and they've accepted to take a bullet. Some people stay. They suspect they'll bounce in 1 year straight back up and get back into it. But it's a very messy story that none of us have all the answers to. And I think it's been managed, as Rory said, in a really dysfunctional manner.
There are lots of implications. So Eddie Jones named his squad today. They're up in Paris for the first day out in the Six Nations, and the RFU have clarified Jones can absolutely pick players playing at championship clubs. That's no issue. But crucially, there's no definitive word on if any of those England players join clubs abroad. Are they still eligible for the national team under the exceptional circumstances clause? So England are going to have to figure out how to handle this situation. From a European point of view, even if Saracens win the Champions Cup, relegation prohibits them from partaking in the competition next year. So they are a minimum of 2 years away from the European landscape. And what we do know, Rory, is that they now have 3 huge games left this season, and that's about it. So after Mark McCall saying at the outset of the season, avoiding relegation is the priority, Europe is not. Now, Europe and giving the 2 fingers to everybody is absolutely the priority. So come on in, Leinster.
Yeah, I think I'm sure there'll be a belligerence within that dressing room and a bit of a 2-finger approach that if they do get selected in Premiership games, they'll want to continue to take dent everyone else's prospects. So I'm sure if they came across Exeter in particular, he might feel the stronger. But I think what he plans to do, from the sounds of things, is to the players that we saw actually play against Munster, that kind of young group of players who are really, really talented, and like as Saracens do, as well as having the best elite group of players, they also have the best academy in England and the best bunch of young players. So I think what he'll do is for the Premiership, he'll field those players and get them battle hardened so that next year they go into the Championship ready to go. But I presume against Saracens, we're going to see, against Leinster in the Aviva, we're going to see a very strong, fully motivated, England-heavy Saracens side, kind of a last hurrah. And I think it's going to be a very, very good, it's almost a more tantalising prospect than anything we're going to see in the Six Nations at this stage, because they have been the best 2 teams in Europe since Toulon went off the scene. They've had 2 very interesting games over the last few years. I think this could be the defining one of the 3, and I think they're a serious danger to Leinster, who don't get much reward for topping the seedings, apart from the fact that they're guaranteed to be at home in the semi-final if they win.
Yeah. Matt, as for what happens to Saracens, interestingly, there's no salary cap in the Championship, but when presumably they win promotion back to the Premiership, then they have to open their books again and show that everything is in order. Now, I don't know, is there some voodoo they can work? Fiona Steed was on the show yesterday and she half wondered, might they front load the payments? You get three quarters of your salary next year and then you're back to a quarter the following year. Who knows what could happen? Owen Farrell, according to the Sun newspaper, stood up in front of the team and said, I'm staying next year. Again, best intentions, and we'll have to see the reality of the situation. It is hard not to think that this is the end of the team. It will be asset stripped, players will leave. This is the end for Saracens. It's very hard to, I know you don't have the finances to hand, but it's very hard to imagine them keeping this show on the road in any kind of way that looks familiar now.
You would suspect that there's a couple of years hiatus minimum. It's not impossible, and the scenario you put out, I know happens in rugby league. There was a club in Sydney, my club, West Tigers in Sydney, and one of their great players, Robbie Farah, had agreed to help them out because they were caught in a salary cap scenario where he took very little pay for a couple of years and then got a lot more towards the end of it. So that type of deal is not illegal. There's nothing wrong with that. And they may very well be able to pay their players a huge amount of money next year and move through it. I don't know. Yeah. But these guys, there'll be 2 major factors. One is obviously the finances, and 2, these guys aren't the quality of the Championship is a huge drop. I know Dean Richards, who's coaching Newcastle, I've heard him speak on how they have to completely change their training to prepare to come back to the Premiership, because the games just don't deliver enough volume and intensity to get them ready for what they're going to. So how does Top Line International a year before the Lions go down and play in the second division? Like you'd be putting your whole career on the line. And look, some of them will do it because, as I said, I'm certain that those guys at Saracens really love the club. I know that. As I said, I visited there and I was hugely impressed with the culture they have, and I know that's not just talk. They really do love their club, and it shows. But whether that can actually translate into spending a year in a second division competition, wow, that's a massive, massive ask.
Mm. Rory, quickly, there's no word, I haven't heard anything of their titles being stripped, as Matt even pondered.
It doesn't seem to be on the table. I think that was maybe one of the things that might have come about had they opened their books, but they've chosen relegation and they'll hang on to them. I mean, while it's probably the right thing to do, I can't imagine Leinster would take any joy in a, what would it be, a 6th European star on their jersey based on you know, based on that. You know, like it'd be so hollow. It's like those Olympians who talk about getting the medal in the post 3 years after they finished fourth. You know, I mean, it's all about the podium. It's the week afterwards. It's the celebration. I mean, it might be correct. Exeter maybe, but I mean that it's still very, very hollow. It might be the right thing to do, but it's still very, very hollow. So, but yeah, like there's every reason to think that like they have cheated their way. Certainly the Premierships, they've broken the rules and they won having broken those rules. You know, there's no salary cap in the European Cup, and you know, the salary cap is a lot lower than France. The Irish clubs, provinces have no salary cap to adhere to, you know, nor do the Welsh, you know, so I'd be less inclined to be calling for that, but I can understand why Exeter would, albeit what would they really get out of it?
Yeah. We had Dominic Day and George Cruz in here promoting their new company recently, and Day, I think it was, at one point did suggest, well, maybe we're not the only team doing this, and it was kind of shot down quickly enough. Well, hang on, we're here to talk about you, but that hung in the air.
Well, in 2015, I think 3 or 4 clubs, again, like, you know, because of this lack of transparency, none of them were named. I mean, they were named in the papers. None of them were officially named in the Premiership. But, you know, Saracens was one of the clubs, but they were in breach, and they were basically given the slap on the wrist and said, "Don't do it again." And I do get the impression that most clubs took that as their kind of warning and went away and got and you know, there is quite a gap between Saracens and and Exeter and the rest. So I mean, it's supposed to, yeah, as Matt said, it's supposed to make it more fair. I mean, there's no supposed to be dynasties in the salary cap model. The whole point is that you get so good that your players want more money and you have to basically disperse and start again. Yeah. That's the whole point of it. And I mean, we've no salary cap in Ireland, and Leinster are too strong for everyone else. I mean, there is definite merit to having one. But yeah, so like it's an imperfect model, and it does look like the Premiership will be much more wide open. But at the same time, it's going to be very difficult for anyone from the Premiership to win the European Cup for a couple of years.
Fair point. To matters on the field then, Matt, if we segue into those, Saracens, under the circumstances, at their belligerent best against Racing in that second half, behind the 8 ball. Vinny Villapola has gone off again, broken his arm again. So he's broken his right arm twice, his left once, and he's broken his arm again now for a 4th time. So there's susceptibility to that, clearly, and that's really worrying for him, and a big blow for Saracens in England. But they came back, they beat Racing, which was no mean feat. Skelton was sent off. Huddle afterwards, you could hear the cries from inside the huddle. That's what's coming to Leinster now. This is going to, I mean, it's quite clearly the round of the quarterfinals.
Yeah, I was cheering very strongly for Racing during yesterday's game and yelling at them for blowing it. My goodness. Well, didn't Racing blow that second half? But it also exposes the weakness in Racing. Their attack is all about just the brilliance of the individual, and they do have absolutely glorious individual players there. You know, Finn Russell, Vakatawa, Teddy Tonga, that pass from Machino there for that late try was from Teddy Ibrahim for that try in the first half, just glorious stuff. But they really should have won that game. It was some really dumb rugby gone on there when your opposition has a man down. And they'll regret that very much. And it could cost Leinster because, look, Saracens are an awesome team. They're not a good team, they're an awesome team. They're the best team in Europe before this furor occurred. And this will definitely galvanise them because exactly as you said, Joe, we know our fate. They know where they're going. They're going to the second division. But they also know that they can hold the European Cup above their heads as their last act. And that is going to be a massively motivating factor for them. This is going to be a really, really hard battle for Leinster in that quarterfinal, a massive, massive battle. I think it's going to be one of the biggest games in the history of the club. And, it's not. I wouldn't be sitting here saying I think Leinster are going to win this easily, or that Leinster can win it. But they're going to have to play a lot smarter and a lot better than they did against them last year because they were well and truly beaten last year.
A point we touched on last week, Matt, with Stuart Barnes, we were looking at Leinster and it's all been a bit too easy for them. Even, Leon last week, they didn't have to be at their best by any means to put 40 points on Leon in the end. Certainly they stuttered it, particularly in the first half at the weekend against Benetton. It was, 3-0 at half-time. So they've sauntered through in many respects and it's all been very impressive, and so it's kind of a dangerous enough thing to critique them in any great way for that. But they're now going to have to go into Six Nations mode. They're the bulk suppliers, and suddenly they will re-emerge from that and be up against Saracens in this do or die match, no second chances. The worry might be for Leinster, Matt, with your coach's hat on, have they been really sternly road tested thus far this season?
No, they haven't. Absolutely, Joe. They have not been tested. I think we should start at the beginning of that. Leinster are an exceptionally good side, and they're playing very, very well, and they deserve all the credit they get. Saturday's game was probably the worst I've seen them play in a couple of seasons, and it was a absolutely turgid game of rugby to have to sit through for 80 minutes. I wish I had a fast forward button because it was very, very ordinary rugby. But they have not been tested and they have not been pushed. That's not their fault. You can't sort of blame them. They've beaten everyone that's come up against them. They're undefeated. They've racked up a huge amount of points and they've finished first in Europe, but no one's gone near them. And the problem there's going to be that they're going to go from sliding through and into the equivalent of the final. I think these are the two best teams. I thought Saracens were going to do this. This is the card they're going to play to try and just get in. But when I was thinking about it at the beginning of the year, I had no idea that the scenario would be 1v8 because you'd look at any other game in there and it's certainly a lot easier than Saracens. And Leinster are going to have to really beat the best. And they won't, if they do what they usually do, they get the team back in after the Six Nations and they don't play that team that next week. They give the boys a rest after Six Nations, so they'll go in with no games under their belt. So it's a very, very big ask for them.
I think there is an extra game this year just because of the way the World Cup year is fallen and the Six Nations is earlier this year, so it finishes on March 13th. So I do think they will.
2 games.
They will have a game where they can put the team out. And I do think that maybe the Six Nations is coming at a good time for Leinster because Matt's completely right. I mean, their second team is the second best team in the Pro 14 right now, and they're just so much better than everyone else. And then they earned this really easy draw by dint of their excellent performance last season.
Sorry to interrupt. I feel like you're about to pitch the case for a salary cap in Irish rugby.
I don't know about a salary. Well, I mean, one thing we kind of didn't. I mean, I think we're moving towards a British and Irish League, and CBC have taken a stake in Pro 14 and in the Premiership. So by the time Saracens actually come back, it could all be we all could all be part of a happy family. I don't know how you work a salary cap because we talk about transparency. None of us know what Leinster's budget is. None of us know what Munster's budget is. I do think that there needs to be a more of a dispersal of players around the country. I think maybe a draft ultimately could be what solves the disparity between Leinster and the rest because they're so much stronger than everyone else. But I do they're sauntering through the season so impressively. They can rotate anyone in and out and not really weaken themselves, but they'll need all their big guns to be fit and firing in that game in the first weekend in April. And I think the majority, 16 of them are in the Ireland squad. Yeah. They'll have been battle hardened over those 5 big test matches. Now they'll lose a couple, but Caelan Doris you'd expect to have a couple of caps under his belt by the time you come around. Maybe Max Deegan as well, a bit more experience, a bit more hardened, and that will help them be ready for that. And I think that extra game they'll have will help as well. So I do think it's a problem in Irish rugby that if you think about why Saracens are being punished and why there's a salary cap, and then you look at the absolutely lopsided nature of Irish rugby right now, that would be a concern for me in the bigger picture. Split
Leinster in 2, says Rory.
Absolutely.
And Dublin while we're at it. We'll revisit your draft proposals on a quiet week. Matt, Ulster, they came through against Bath in the end. It was 7-0 at half-time, finished 22-15. They have absolutely played their way into this quarter-final. They've put in some really good performances. They deserve to be there. And ultimately, their reward is a trip away to Toulouse. So, best of luck.
I was watching Toulouse play yesterday and they had the quarter-final graphic was moving up and down on the side of the screen. I just couldn't. I sat there and said, geez, you work your guts out. You play well above your weight. You're a middleweight fighting in a heavyweight division like Ulster are, and they've been inspirational. And that's the joy you get. You've got to go to Stanwallen and play a team that just loves playing at home. And Dupont played for Toulouse yesterday. It was absolutely glorious, as was Entomac and Ramos. They're just really special young players. You're going to put Vakatawa in into that French backline. It's going to be a really, really joyous backline to watch. Yeah. But, you've got to give Ulster huge credit. They've played for each other this year. They've tackled. Their defence is the best thing about what they do. They just, when you have a scramble D, if someone makes a break, all bets are off. There's no system for that. It's just got to be energy and desire and passion. And there was a shot there on the weekend on a break And all of a sudden there's just 5 white jerseys almost pushing each other out of the way to get to the guy with the ball. You know, they're really wanting to do it. They still make lots of mistakes when they've got ball in hand. There's too much drop ball, too many errors. But, wow, the effort and the passion and what Ravenhill has come back to as an absolute fortress on those Friday nights up there. You can't help but smile and feel good for them. They've from the horrible place they were in 18 months ago, and they were in a very, very bad place. Ulster Rugby was in a really, really bad place.
Rory,
but they've come forward. Sorry, Joe, they've come forward a lot.
They sure have. To extend Matt's point, Rory, when you look at Ulster, do you think there's more in those players? So when he talks about the drop balls and maybe certain aspects they could clean up, is that something Dan McFarland will improve fairly radically over the next season, or is there just a point where some of these players have hit a ceiling?
No, I think there's definitely room for growth in that squad. I mean, I think they've probably the best player in Irish rugby in Marcel Coetzee. I think you put him into Munster or Connacht and they probably, certainly if you put him into the Munster setup, they probably make the quarter-final. He's that good. I think he's just possibly the best player in Europe right now. He's just a phenomenal player who's carrying an awful lot of the burden in that pack because they don't have a massive amount of ball carrying in that squad. I do think they're so reliant on their 23 in a way that Leinster just are not. And if they lose Will Addison, say, or John Cooney during the Six Nations, or Ian Henderson, Jack McGrath, they're tight 5. If they lose anyone from that tight 5, they're in trouble, as we saw at the weekend. So if they can keep all those players together and turn up in the same way they did in Dublin last April or late March for that quarter-final against Leinster, I'd give them a chance against anyone. But if they lose one or two, particularly in the tight 5, if they lost Coetzee, they're gone. Yeah. John Cooney, probably the same. They're kind of probably more reliant on a couple of big hitters than anyone else. I think they're a very good team, but they're still a little bit below the top 3 or 4. And I think Toulouse are probably at the lowest rung of that top 4 or 5. So it's a horrible draw, but I don't think going to Exeter would have been any easier. So, I think they're on the right track. I think quarterfinals are a really good result. I think a better performance than the Pro 14. They're going to be in that quarter-final, semi-final because they're not catching Leinster. Last year they won their quarter-final against Connacht and got absolutely hockeyed by Glasgow in the semi-final, which they can't let happen again. So that's where I think they improve. I mean, their quarter-final performance last year was outstanding, but I think they're more consistent this year. And in Coetzee they have an absolute world superstar, and Addison is really, really excellent as well. They have a couple of really good players in really key positions. And actually, we should mention Jordan Larmour has been come away from Benetton with some kind of foot issue, so Will Addison's ears will have pricked up to that news as it's going on in the background. Just briefly on Thomond Park yesterday, we had the game live here. I know you were there for the Irish Independent. Ospreys were always going to fold in this game at some point, quite clearly, and Munster only had a certain sense of pride, I suppose, for want of a better word, to play for. Say take the first 30, 40 minutes, if we're to look at where Munster are and where they need to go. They made the breakthrough, I think, on the half-hour mark with Stander's try. What did we see from them? Oh, you're focusing on the 20 or 30 minutes that certainly Munster won't want us to focus on.
But
because
isn't that the relevant 30 minutes when the game was alive?
Well, yeah, I think that's the relevant 30 minutes for their season so far. And I think what they will look at is Craig Casey coming on and scoring with a second touch really impressively. Jack O'Sullivan coming on, Wycherley playing quite well, although there's room to improve on a couple of aspects. I think what their focus now is going to be is to get those young guys in, and when they come back after the Six Nations, they have their Ireland players, but they also have these guys coming off the bench and adding something. The first 30 minutes was probably the worst half an hour of rugby I've seen all season, and there was a moment just before Stander's try where they were 6-0 down and they actually got a bit of momentum through. Dave Kilcoyne made a big carry, CJ Stander made a big carry, and the ball was dirtied up a bit. Murray looked at JJ Hanrahan and he wasn't in the right place, and he looked at him again, he shouted at him, I've no idea what he said, and he went, there was a knock on previously, he went, oh look, just give us a scrum, I don't want to play with this ball. And I was like, this is really negative, you've just got on the front foot, that's not a good sign. And then they went and scored, and all was right with the world, and Murray scored, and he actually played quite well over the course of the day. I think they need a break. There's 3 weekends off now for the provincial players. Obviously the Ireland players will go in Six Nations, new environment, hopefully a bit of momentum out of that, and they'll come back and they have a nice run of fixtures during the Six Nations and after the Six Nations in the Pro 14. I think in the end, if they can come back healthy from the Six Nations and also get, Casey in particular just looks the real deal. He just brought something to the table yesterday. If they can get those players blooded in, they might be able to finish the season on something of a high.
Matt, before we go, I almost feel it's at the point of offering some kind of condolences as to what's going on in your homeland. I know you were back for Christmas. I see what's going on, and I just know I still can't appreciate the scale.
Yeah, Joe, it was so upsetting. I don't mind saying there's a couple of days I was in tears there, and it's the scale of what's gone on. It is really unimaginable. If you can imagine there's a fire in Dublin and it goes all the way to Moscow, that's what you're talking about. We're up to 3,000 people who lost their homes, literally millions and millions of our beautiful native animals killed. One guy, I was listening to the radio back in Australia, and there was a guy flying over the Kosciuszko National Park, which is our highlands, really unique part of Australia, and he said it's like an atomic bomb's gone off. I mean, just the devastation on every front, be it human and natural, is just remarkable. My daughter's in Canberra, finishing off a degree, and I spoke to her this morning. It's the first day that she's seen blue skies and no smoke. So, and they got a giant thunderstorm with hail that came through and smashed up all the cars. It's just like nothing I've ever seen. There's words like Armageddon and tsunamis and you're trying to get words around the size of what has gone on here. I know the area very well. I used to go down there as a kid. My grandparents used to live down the south coast, and we spent a lot of time on the beaches down there, and they're really pristine, really beautiful, still gorgeous parts of Australia, and it's just been absolutely smashed. But it's the human scale of people. It's a holiday season, so it's like August, and there's no one going there. There's no one buying coffees. There's no one going on holidays. There's no one using the supermarkets. There's no one going to the pubs, the restaurants, and economically now these people are just crucified. And it doesn't matter which way you turn. It's just on a scale that we've never seen. A guy said it's going to take a century. One of the scientists in Sydney University there was about the college. He said he suspects it's going to take a century to recover. You just can't get your head around those sort of figures and things. It was truly a word we knock around in sport, but it was a tragedy. It really was a tragedy.
You'd answered my next question. I was going to ask how far does this set the country back, even just on a ecological, geographical terrain. I was going to suggest, is it a decade or two, so 100 years potentially? In
those certain areas, yeah. There's certain areas. Australia was isolated for so many, millions of years. Its environment is incredibly fragile. So this one area, the south coast of New South Wales, Victoria, and up onto the highlands, has all these unique animals that are found nowhere else in the world, and we don't know how many millions of those have been killed. Did some survive? They don't know if the birds survived. They don't know. There's just so much we don't know now. And one of the reasons is the forests in Australia burn naturally, and that gives regrowth, regeneration. But the intensity of these fires killed the trees. Now that usually doesn't happen in our bushfires. It can happen, but usually we get regeneration very quickly after a bit of rain. It's a natural part of the process. Yeah. But not on this one. They just don't know how much is dead and will never come back. And then those trees take 100 years to grow. It's just, again, we just have all these unknowns that keep listing on and on and on the human front, on the climate, on the water, and on the unique trees and animals and ferns and everything, the reptiles that live there. It's truly remarkable.
No, it's just horrific. And it's fair to say Australia the last number of years have not been anything really but a bit of a barrier towards any global effort to reduce carbon emissions. We've seen coal brought into Parliament and, well, what's the problem with that? It's not doing any harm. This crisis even doesn't seem, the last time I looked anyway, it doesn't seem to have sparked any kind of universal recognition that things need to change on that front pretty dramatically.
Joe, you're right. I'd be hopeful that the devastation that we've seen is smacking some of these morons into action. There's a minute, so this is basically, politics in Australia is like England, Tory or Liberal, and Labor on the left. And it's a rump of the Liberal Party that are denying science. Not all of them, but a rump, but they're a powerful rump. And there's a couple of the people in the Liberal Party, Matt Keane, who's the Environment Minister in New South Wales, is starting to speak up and say what morons they are. And it's time that we all copped on. And even to the point, okay, if we don't agree what's causing climate change, can we just agree that it's here and start doing something? They've had 10 years of doing absolutely bugger all and looking after a very small part of our society. And, you know, their response, to say that they lit the match, they didn't. But to get the inaction we have in our electricity markets, how we're producing our electricity prices in Australia have trebled over the last few years, and because no one will invest. There's a whole lot of things that these people who refuse to do anything about it because they just want to protect coal, which is the export industry of coal and gas is massive in Australia. And that's their sole purpose. And hopefully out of this destruction, we can get some progress on that's just sensible, you know, just big grown-ups talking sensibly, which is something is pretty rare in politics in Australia at the moment.
Yeah, nearly 25% of the world's coal, which I hadn't realised until this all kicked off. Listen, Six Nations around the corner. I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks so much for joining us.
Looking forward to it, mate. Great to see you.
Matt Williams there and Ruaidhri O'Connor of the Irish Independent. Rory, cheers.
Hi, Joe.
Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.